Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before I get started, I would like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space, and thank you, our fellow culturists, for listening in. Today, we have Dede Wakefield from Alogent. Dede, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and Alogent.
Alogent is a financial technology services company. We provide content management, digital banking, and check imaging and back office processing to financial institutions, credit unions, large financial institutions across the country, and in a handful of other countries around the world. And I'm their CEO. Alogent's got an interesting history. We are a combination of three acquisitions that have been made over the last 2.5 years. Those three acquisitions coming from three very different places at very different levels of life cycle of those companies. And we brought those three together to form what is now Alogent. So we have about 225 employees. We're headquartered right here in Peachtree Corners. And we have offices in Las Vegas, in Carlsbad, California, and in Austin, Texas.
Awesome. Well, I know you're going to have some great shares from that because three different cultures coming together, multiple locations, I'm sure gives you some challenges in managing expectations and the culture of the group and aligning everybody to get where you want to go. So if you could start us off, tell us a little bit about the three companies that came together, maybe the sizes of those groups and the fundamental culture differences that you had to bring together to make it all work.
Sure. So the first two were relatively equal in size, and they were both acquired within about 45 days of each other. So I would think of it more as a merger versus acquisitions of one or the other. Both were about 75, 80 employees. They both had about the same length of history, though one had been privately held its entire life cycle. The other we acquired out of a large public company where it had really just been a business unit. So being a business unit of $1 billion organization is very different than being a small 80-person organization that's been privately held for 15 years. So you can imagine the cultures were very different. Everything from accountability, responsibility, escalation of authority, and really, even it went as far as to really impact the different levels of creativity, innovation, and collaboration that really occurred just because of the makeup of those organizations inside of their different places. So it was an interesting journey the first 6 months or so, combining those organizations and really coming up with, we really took the company on a journey to rebrand, to determine the name of the company, what we were going to stand for, a mission, vision, our values. And we took about 6 months to really solidify all of that and really bring it to a place where the employees had something as a new collective organization to really hold on to. Because as anything, from an acquisition perspective, having done a lot of M&A in my career, it is sometimes very hard for employees to let go of where they came from and kind of join something new. And what we weren't trying to do was eliminate where they came from, but instead bring the best of both of those organizations into the future. So I would say that it was difficult, and it took a lot of work, a lot of thought, and we wanted to make sure we were paying homage to both of the organizations as far as where they had grown up. But we kind of navigated through that, and in about 6 months after both of those companies had been acquired, we kind of relaunched, rebirthed, really rebranded as Alogent, and kind of started, kind of afresh with the culture, with the environment, with what we were really here to do.
So you had one organization that was about 80 people that was more of a small business in a sense. And then you had this other 80-person organization that came from a much larger entity, right? What did you see was like the fundamental differences in the way those people operated? What was the cultural differences in how they work day to day, how people manage? Give us an idea of some examples of those differences.
So the organization that had been inside the larger public company had not really operated as a business unit. It had a handful of leadership who all reported into different parts of the organization, none of which kind of came together and said, this is a business, this is my P&L, there's revenue and there's expense, and this is how we're running a full business. It also was surrounded by infrastructure that was more corporate infrastructure, so it wasn't really cohesive in that way either, in that it didn't have its own finance, accounting, HR, IT, various internal functions that also help to keep a company cohesive. So that was really not necessarily a difficult journey, but one that we had to really start to tackle pretty immediately. If you then contrast that to the smaller organization, it was run by a founder CEO, and I think the biggest challenge there was that he was very present in his location, which was in Henderson, Nevada, just outside of Las Vegas, and he was seen as the decision maker. Everything really rolled up to him. So there was a lot of a lack of, I wouldn't say accountability. It wasn't that employees didn't feel accountable for the work they were doing, but they also always saw that leader as their stopgap, as the decision maker, as the one who was going to have the final yes/no, instead of being able to really put that responsibility on themselves, whether it be the next level leadership or even middle management. And the company I am trying to build and continue to, because it's always a work in progress, is one where everyone really feels like they have the authority to make decisions, to make mistakes, to try something new. I mean, we're an innovative organization. We want people to come up with ideas. We want people to challenge the status quo. And if you don't give people kind of that rope and give them that runway, it's going to stifle that internally. And the larger you get, the more that you're going to see that it's not really transpiring down at the level that you need it to, and kind of continuing to build up.
Yeah, I completely understand. I mean, there's a big difference in working in an entrepreneur, founder-led environment where kind of the buck stops there, or you go to a person, and in a lot of those organizations I've seen, probably not necessarily the one you worked with, but people can go to another person for an answer instead of having to really work through it on their own, because they get used to a certain rhythm.
Right.
And in some environments, they're enabled to, go find a solution, make those errors, and move on with those. And I know those are completely different environments. So before Alogent, share with us what you would consider your best company culture experience, best company culture you worked for, in, with, and how that affected what you're building at Alogent now.
Yeah, so I would say one of the best cultures I think I ever worked in was another local company. They have since been acquired, but it was a company called Check Free Corporation. I worked there for 8 or 9 years. We eventually sold the company to another large public company, but it was founder led, but they were public, and it was a $1 billion organization with 1,000 employees. But at the core of it, best of breed technology, best of class kind of processes and procedures, investment in the employees, and collaboration were just key. It's really the place where I learned learned about employee development and making sure that you put the tools in people's toolboxes to make sure they can do their jobs, both on the tactical side, like I'm a developer, I need to learn these skills to be able to code, but also on the soft side. I mean, I'm a manager, I need to know how to deal with situational leadership. I need to know how to deal with conflict. And that environment really, over those years, and it could be because it was one of my first jobs, so it could be that was influencing as well to me, but having that foundation at that time in my life, I think was instrumental in being able to look at Alogent now and say, these are the things that really helped me.
So with that development that they had in that environment, can you walk us through, like, what did the development look like that really resonated with you and the employees of that group? What was the structure? Was it online training? Was it one-on-one coaching? What really went into that process?
It was actually a combination of all of that, really. There was certainly online training, and everyone does that, and that gives you a lot of the soft skills, like, if you need to get better at Excel, or you just want to take a quick course on public speaking or whatever. But also, they really did a good job, especially with kind of new management or new managers, really guiding them through an employee kind of training process that allowed you to really build up the skill sets you needed to deal with situations, to address performance reviews. I mean, just some of the basics that when you don't get that, and then you see that in an organization, that those things are just really hard for people to navigate through. And what's impactful is if you're a new manager and you don't know how to work yourself through those situations, the person suffering is your employee. And you can't really fix that. But also, yes, some one-on-one coaching, and then also pulling groups of people together. We actually had a program called Check for University, and it was 2 or 3 days. We're actually somewhat replicating it at Alogent right now. We actually have our first one next week. We're calling it a boot camp, but it really was pulling a group of people together to sit through 2 or 3 days of everything from product training to listening, to hearing from the executives, to going through simulations of various things. But to me, one of the main things that resonated with me, which is why I think that this boot camp is so important that we're launching at Alogent, is that those 10, 12, 20 people, whatever, our group was much larger at CheckFree because it was a larger company than Alogent. But that group of, let's say it was 20 of us, we spent 48 hours together, 72 hours together. We all came from different areas, different departments, and then we went back to our offices in very different places because the company was dispersed beyond just Atlanta. But you had a lifeline from then on, and that cohesion and that ability to have that person to call. If all of a sudden you're questioning something about, just wanting to understand something about a development product, and you're in HR, but you've got the development, manager that was in your class. I mean, they're your friend, they're your colleague, they're someone you can reach out to, and starting to kind of blanket the organization with some of those kind of creating that network, that web of relationships, I think was instrumental to me, because it allowed me to navigate through problems throughout the rest of my career at CheckFree very, I wouldn't say easily, but I didn't have to hesitate, to stop, to think, to step back and go, okay, how am I going to think about that? Oh, I'll call somebody, and you kind of have that lifeline. And so at Alogent, we're trying to do the same thing. I thought it was crucial, and I think that, to be honest, it was one of the things that helped me to navigate success there.
So from a lot of my reading, I understand that cross-departmental relationships are a big part of building great networks and great cultures, right? Being able to go to somebody in another department that you wouldn't have otherwise spoken with on a daily basis. And so what I'm hearing from you is the 48, 72 hours in a room is not just people from your department, but it's other departments. Correct. Where you're really spending that time to build a relationship. Yeah,
it really is a cross-functional group of people. In our case, we're starting because it is a lot of product training, as well as sprinkling in of other things related to the company. But because of the product training and understanding how the products work, not necessarily on a technical side, but just an overarching understanding of the organization. More of the new hires are starting it, but it is a cross-functional group. There's people from sales, people from support, people from development, people from accounting, HR, that all will come together, and then they disperse back into their various locations. Some are remote, some work in an office, some don't. Some work at the corporate headquarters, and to me, they also will meet the speakers, right? So some of the various kind of product experts or experts of those topics, and some of the leadership who is presenting at various things, and it just gives them an additional kind of group of people to reach out to, because starting a new job can be somewhat overwhelming. But to me, we're doing it every single month for 2019, primarily to get through what we hope is 125 people inside of a year, so that we can get to a cadence where we can really hit on everyone, because we want those pockets of that foundation, that web of network of relationships to start to really take hold.
Yeah, I know in my past careers, it felt like as a new employee or a new person on the team, oftentimes you were emailing different people trying to get information, and it was difficult. But then when you went to the sales kickoff or you went to training together, all of a sudden everybody got a lot more responsive. There's just something about that face-to-face time that builds the relationship. Now, you had mentioned earlier that everybody's going to be together 24, 48, 72 hours, and you have multiple locations. So are you bringing everybody into one location, keeping them under one roof, or multiple hotel rooms? What does that look like from an experience perspective, beyond just being in kind of the training room together?
Yeah, so we are bringing people in from other places. So we will vary the location between our two largest offices are the Henderson, Las Vegas office and here. So that's really where most of the training that each month's boot camp will occur, just primarily because of space. Yeah. But it doesn't mean when we have it here in our office around the corner that we will only have employees that are based here. We'll bring remote people in. We'll bring people in from our Carlsbad or Austin or Henderson office, and then vice versa when we go out west. So, while not trying to blow up the expense budget, right, at the same time trying to make sure there is a cross-pollination of locations as well. And keeping them together from, morning through dinner, through the next day. Some will be in hotels, some may live there and go back home. But encouraging through the leadership and some of the speakers that'll be there, encouraging that camaraderie through, dinners together and maybe, a few drinks at the bar after, but those types of things, so that when they do all go back home, they still feel like there was a bond with that group of people. Awesome.
So just in that bond building, how does it work with maintaining the culture across multiple locations? So you mentioned multiple places. Is your headquarters here in Atlanta?
Headquarters is here in Atlanta. Okay. Yep.
So I'm assuming that, or probably a bad word to use, but the culture is probably set here in a lot of ways where the majority of people are. How does that filter out to the other locations, and how is that maintained across those locations?
That's probably the hardest thing to do, is to maintain a common culture across multiple offices with different departments resonating in those offices, and also just when different leadership is in different places. We do as good a job as anyone. I mean, everyone could argue that communication needs to be better in every single company. Right. There's never an exit interview that anyone does, no matter where you are, what company you're in, that they don't say, "I wish somebody communicated better to me." But that's just, that's just what it is. But you can always strive to not have someone do that in an exit interview. So that's our goal. But we do quarterly meetings, and my chief strategy officer and I, we generally are responsible for most of the content and for conducting the quarterly meetings, which include a lot of just shout outs for achievements, metrics from the quarter, and we'll hit on a couple themes or a couple initiatives that we're working on in a group setting, and we rotate where we host those meetings. So even though everybody gets on a webinar, we will physically rotate being in the various offices so that no one office gets all the attention. And we feel like that helps to just keep pushing the culture by being in those offices and then being able to spend time with those people after those meetings. And then also in all of our offices, there are leaders. All my leadership is not here in the Atlanta office. My leadership is spread out as well, because as with most technology companies these days, we have a bit of a disparate, kind of dispersed organization. But that allows for the leadership to be in the various locations, often and periodically, to continue to just put more attention towards, just the messages, the culture, the communication of the organization.
Yeah, I love the idea and the simplicity of the rotation. It's one of those things where when our fellow listeners out there, our fellow culturists are probably like, well, that's really simple, Josh. Yeah, go around to the other locations. But I know I've worked for companies where, they're headquartered in another state, and they may have a large concentration of people here in Atlanta or New York, but you never see them show up, right? They didn't show up, even though maybe it's not an official office, but they have 100 in California and 10 in Atlanta, right? So a high concentration, but they didn't go on the rotation.
Right.
So that's a really, simple item, I think, for other listeners out there to think about of, are you going out and visiting not only another office, but another area of the country where you have multiple employees that you can work with.
Yeah, it's an investment, right? It's definitely an investment. I mean, at the holidays, we do holiday luncheons around the various offices, and I had no other reason other than to visit the team, but I flew out to Carlsbad, California to participate with 20 employees. I have about 80 here. I then took the red eye home so I could be here for this one. And other of my team, of my leadership team, went to Henderson just because I wasn't able to go to that one. Otherwise, I probably would have tried to make it to all four. And get plenty of frequent flyer miles in doing so. But those things I think are important, and they resonate with the employees to see the leadership, participating and putting that investment in.
So pre-Alogent, one of the things I like to have people share is their disaster story, right? So you don't have to name any names or companies that you worked for, but in that, what was the culture you worked for or worked in that was just not conducive to, an amazing experience for you, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I won't name any names, so thank you for that. But I would say that probably one of the worst, and worst is probably a harsh word to say, but there have been one or two cultures that have been less than inspiring to me. For me, the larger the organization, but where leadership is not being given the accountability and the authority to run their divisions, is really where culture starts to break down. Where even though in an organization of our size, while I like to push out accountability and give my various leadership team colleagues authority to make decisions and to be present with their teams, it's easier to do in a smaller company. It's easy to do in a small company. In a larger organization, it should be, because if you're sitting at the top, and you've got 1,000, 2,000 employees, you really don't have time to know what all 2,000 employees are doing. But if you have more of a controlling, if you have a leadership that has a more controlling nature to begin with, you're gonna see that is kind of transpiring in an organization that really is afraid to do anything without getting that approval, the commitment, the nod of the head from people, at a more senior level. And it's stifling. It is stifling. And I've been in that situation before. I was a leader, though, in that situation, where I wasn't a leader in that I was, a senior leader in the controlling sense, but I was a leader of a team of people. And I really had to dig deep and work hard to keep my team motivated, because they were seeing the turmoil and the challenges that were going on at those leadership levels, and just the lack of collaboration and the lack of cohesiveness that leadership team had. It does, waterfall. I don't think sometimes leadership teams realize that when they're not seen as cohesive and collaborative as an organization, that they're not working and playing nicely in the sandbox in a cross-functional perspective, that it actually does translate down to the way the rest of the organization is going to operate. Because people are going to be hesitant to make decisions, or they're going to be, scared to make a phone call or to say something that might not, sit well with a colleague in a different department. And that can be really jeopardizing to the success of an organization.
Yeah, I can definitely see, given my past around managing organizations and groups, that, we always set the alignment. We followed traction, EOS, and, we did rocks and other things that waterfall down, and we worked with the teams to come up with what those rocks were. But you're talking about it almost at an exponential level, right? You're talking about the executive team for a 1,000, 10,000 person company not being able to set that alignment at the top.
Right.
And then everybody else doesn't really know which direction to go.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the executives, I think sometimes they don't see it, right? I think if they saw it, they would hopefully think to address it. But I think sometimes they don't see it, or the organizations have gotten so big that they don't recognize that it's impacting the way the organization's operating. And it's making the middle management, in which case that was where my role was, it's making us work really hard to try to motivate and keep a cohesive environment for the teams we're managing, which can lead to attrition, can lead to, multiple HR type, situations, which really is one of the most critical things all of us have to work on and need to do anyway in our jobs, which is hire good employees and keep them happy.
Yeah. So the last thing that to recap real quick, we kind of went full circle on that communication issue, right? So we threw in alignment. Mm-hmm. So to recap, understand where the organization is going, have that alignment at the executive level, and then in addition to be able to communicate that all across the organization, and hopefully not pivot too much to throw everybody off or have to realign or recommunicate, in a overly, too often, right?
Yeah.
To feel like everybody's pivoting too often. So my final question for you is, for 2019, we're in the new year. What is the one culture item you're most looking forward to enhancing, adding into the business, or working on?
So for all my employees, it'll be a bit of a spoiler alert because we haven't really had our company meeting yet for 2019, but sense of urgency. I feel like that's something that has to be constantly talked about. In this, in the world we're in, where things are changing every day, and especially in the space we're in right now, financial technology, there are constant, contributors to the industry that are disrupting. There are new things coming out every day. There are mergers and acquisitions happening in our space all the time. And we as an organization owe it to ourselves for the success of our future to have a sense of urgency about everything we're doing. If an idea comes to mind, we need to feel like we've got the rope and the okay to bring those things up, to address them, to think about them, to say maybe we need to change course, not wait to change course 6 months from now when the threat's already kind of come and gone, and we're now negatively impacted. But that's a big theme that actually I will be kind of presenting with some ways we're going to kind of think about it as a company. Not because there's any one group that's not showing a sense of urgency, but it's just a culture component that I want to enhance as an organization.
Yeah, I love that you brought up something that's a little more intangible, right? I mean, sense of urgency is more of a feeling, an action. It's not, the more tangible things like a perk or an outing or anything like that. So what are some of the ways, if you don't mind sharing, I know this is coming up for your team, but for our listeners, our culturists out there, what do you plan to do? Like, how do you instill a sense of urgency and start to direct people in that way to feel like it's urgent? I know in my organization, one of the things we talk about is, or even at home, right? The bills come in every month, no matter what. It's about what you get done in between those periods, right? The quarter will still hit on the same day of the year, every year.
Yep.
And how much we get done in between the start date of that quarter and the end date is a way to measure urgency. Yeah. So how do you impact urgency, or how do you plan to impact urgency?
Josh, that would be the $1 million question, right? Is how do you do that? I think, when you hit on one of the biggest pieces of it, which is helping the organization see where they can raise their hand and say, this is not helping me. This is minutia I need to get out of, right? And knowing that the leadership team and their next level management supports them raising their hand and saying, this meeting, whether it's a meeting or it's, a standing, 4-hour review session every week. Like, let's take those things off the table. Let's make sure that we're using every minute to do things that are moving us forward instead of stalling us, so that we have those extra minutes back to then be able to put towards another idea or whatever it might be. I think those things in general just eliminating some of that will start to give people the feeling that they've got time back to, and the urgency just kind of comes with that, because it's really not that I look at my organization and would say, nobody has a sense of urgency. It's just looking at problems, ideas, thoughts, what we're working on, prioritizing, putting the urgency towards the ones that really could move, can move the needle, move the company forward, and making sure that we're putting the right level of attention towards all those things at the right level of time, and making sure the organization knows that the leadership team supports that, and that I specifically support it. So I expect to spend a lot of time in 2019 with the employees, and one-on-one with employees, hearing what they think we could do better, to really give them that time to kind of invest into urgency. So yeah, it's a bit intangible, but that's why our boot camps are a little more tangible, right? So there's a bit of a balance there to kind of spread both pieces that help with the culture.
I'm sure spending the time in those one-on-ones with your employees is going to have a huge impact. I know every time I've ever sat with an employee, I could look at the way things were done and come up with ways to do it maybe a little faster, a little more efficiently, or see that they're stuck in some minutia that I wasn't aware of, and help get that off their plate. So I know you're going to see some huge success in the coming year or this year with your urgency. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. We have just had our amazing culture champion, Dede Wakefield from Alogent, on the show. If you would like to hear more, go follow us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, or check out our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.